Part 1. The Night Terror Begins. Detective Sarah Mitchell's phone buzzed against her nightstand at exactly 2:47 a.m., cutting through the peaceful silence of her Phoenix apartment like a knife. The harsh electronic sound jolted her from a deep sleep, and she immediately knew something terrible had happened. After 15 years on the force, she'd learned to distinguish between routine calls and the ones that would haunt her dreams for years to come. This was definitely the latter. "Mitchell," she answered, her voice still thick with sleep, but rapidly clearing as adrenaline kicked in. "Detective, we need you at 1247 Maple Street immediately," came the urgent voice of Dispatch Officer Rodriguez. "We've got a home invasion. It's bad, real bad. 2 adults down, both critical. There's a child involved." Sarah's blood ran cold. Cases involving children always hit different, especially violent ones. She'd seen too many small faces that would never smile the same way again. Too many young voices silenced by trauma. "I'm on my way. ETA 10 minutes. She threw on her clothes with practiced efficiency, grabbed her badge and weapon, and raced through the empty Phoenix streets. The city looked different in the pre-dawn hours. Peaceful, almost innocent. Street lights cast long shadows across suburban neighborhoods where families slept safely, unaware that just miles away, someone's world had been shattered beyond recognition. As she turned onto Maple Street, the scene that greeted her was chaos, barely contained by yellow police tape. Emergency vehicles lined the residential street like a parade of flashing lights. Ambulances, patrol cars, the coroner's van, and the crime scene unit. Neighbors stood in clusters on their front lawns, wrapped in bathrobes and shock, whispering among themselves, while paramedics worked frantically on 2 stretchers. "Dear God," Sarah whispered under her breath as she approached the Martinez house. What had once been a picture-perfect suburban home now looked like a war zone. The front door hung off its hinges, splintered wood scattered across the welcome mat that ironically read, "Bless this home." Windows were shattered, their glass glittering like deadly diamonds in the emergency lights. Officer Johnson, a seasoned patrol cop with 20 years under his belt, met her at the perimeter. His usually steady demeanor was visibly shaken, and Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the crime scene tape for her. "What do we have, Johnson?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves and preparing herself for what lay ahead. "Hell on earth, Detective," he replied grimly. Roberto and Maria Martinez, both 34, found by neighbors around 2:15 a.m. after they heard screaming. Someone broke in through the back door, tore this place apart. Roberto's got severe head trauma. They don't know if he'll make it. Maria's got internal bleeding, broken ribs, possible brain injury. Paramedics are working miracles, just keeping them breathing. Sarah stepped through the destroyed doorway and immediately understood why Johnson looked so rattled. The interior of the house told a story of absolute violence. Furniture was overturned and destroyed. Family photos lay shattered on the hardwood floors, and dark stains that she knew were blood splattered the white walls like abstract art from a nightmare. "Looks like they fought back," she observed, noting defensive wounds on the victims and the scattered destruction. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was personal, or at least it became personal real fast. "That's what we thought too," Johnson agreed. "But Detective, there's something else. Something that's going to make this case even more complicated." "What is it?" "There's a child. 3-year-old Emma Martinez. We found her." Johnson's voice trailed off as he led Sarah toward a small hallway closet near the back of the house. Crime scene photographers were still documenting the area. There, camera flashes illuminating details that would later become crucial evidence. But right now, Sarah's attention was completely focused on the tiny figure huddled in the corner of the closet. 3-year-old Emma Martinez sat motionless on the closet floor, her small body pressed against the back wall as if trying to disappear into the darkness. She clutched a torn teddy bear, once white, now stained with what looked like blood, against her chest with desperate intensity. Her dark eyes, wide with terror, stared straight ahead at nothing and everything simultaneously. "Emma?" Sarah called softly, crouching down to the child's eye level. "Sweetheart, my name is Sarah. I'm a police officer, and I'm here to help you. You're safe now." No response. Emma didn't even blink or acknowledge Sarah's presence. It was as if the little girl had retreated so far into herself that the outside world no longer existed. "She hasn't spoken a single word since we found her," Johnson explained in a hushed tone. "Paramedics checked her over. Physically, she seems unharmed. But mentally, ... Detective, I've never seen a kid so completely shut down. It's like she's frozen in time." Sarah studied Emma's face, noting the tear tracks on her cheeks that had long since dried, the way her tiny knuckles had turned white from gripping the teddy bear, the almost catatonic state she'd retreated into. This wasn't just shock. This was a complete psychological break from reality. A 3-year-old mind's desperate attempt to protect itself from trauma too horrific to process. "Has anyone contacted family?" Sarah asked, her heart breaking for this tiny witness who had seen things no child should ever see. Her aunt, Sarah Chun, is on her way from Scottsdale. She's the emergency contact, and apparently the only family they have in Arizona. The grandparents are flying in from California tomorrow. As Sarah continued to observe Emma, she realized they were dealing with far more than just a home invasion. This child had witnessed something that had traumatized her into complete silence. She was their only witness, their only hope of understanding what had really happened in this house of horrors. But she was also a 3-year-old girl who might never speak again. The nightmare had only just begun. 2 weeks had passed since that horrific night on Maple Street, and the Martinez case had consumed Detective Sarah Mitchell's every waking moment. Her desk at the Phoenix Police Department looked like a hurricane had hit it. Crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic reports, and timeline charts covered every inch of surface space. Coffee cups in various stages of abandon created rings on important documents, testament to the countless sleepless nights she'd spent trying to piece together what had happened in that house. Emma Martinez remained completely mute, a ghostly presence in her Aunt Sarah Chun's carefully child-proof Scottsdale home. Sarah Chun, a successful marketing executive who had never had children of her own, found herself thrust into the role of guardian for a deeply traumatized 3-year-old. The house that had once been a sanctuary of clean lines and modern art was now filled with toys, coloring books, and the oppressive weight of Emma's silence. "She hasn't said a single word," Sarah Chun explained to Detective Mitchell during one of their regular check-ins. "Not hungry, not thirsty, not even no. It's like she's trapped inside her own mind, and I don't know how to reach her." The transformation in Emma was heartbreaking to witness. According to her aunt, Emma had been a chatterbox before the attack, constantly asking questions, singing songs, narrating her play with infectious enthusiasm. Now she moved through the house like a small shadow, clutching that same blood-stained teddy bear, responding only to basic physical needs and showing no interest in the world around her. Dr. Rebecca Torres, a renowned child psychologist specializing in trauma cases, had been working with Emma for 10 days with little progress. Her office, designed to be a safe haven for troubled children, featured soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and shelves filled with therapeutic toys and art supplies. But Emma sat through each session like a statue, unresponsive to even the gentlest attempts at engagement. PTSD in children, this young manifests differently than in adults, Dr. Torres explained to Detective Mitchell after yet another unsuccessful session. Emma witnessed something so traumatic that her mind has essentially shut down all communication as a protective mechanism. She may remember everything, or she may have dissociated completely from the experience. Either way, forcing her to talk could cause more psychological damage. The doctor had tried everything in her considerable arsenal of therapeutic techniques. Play therapy with dolls and action figures yielded nothing. Emma would simply stare at the toys without touching them. Art therapy proved equally futile. When presented with crayons and paper, Emma would hold the crayon but never make a mark. Even basic games designed to encourage any form of communication fell flat against Emma's impenetrable wall of silence. "I've seen selective mutism before," Dr. Torres continued, "but never this complete in someone so young. Whatever Emma saw that night has traumatized her beyond anything I've encountered in 20 years of practice." Meanwhile, Detective Mitchell's investigation was hitting brick walls at every turn. The crime scene had yielded frustratingly little evidence. The perpetrator had been careful. No fingerprints on the obvious surfaces, no DNA evidence that hadn't been contaminated by the chaos of the attack and subsequent rescue efforts. The back door lock showed clear signs of forced entry, but the tool used had been something common, a crowbar or similar implement that could have come from any hardware store in the city. Security cameras in the neighborhood had captured tantalizing glimpses of a figure fleeing the scene around 2:10 a.m., but the image quality was so poor that even the department's best enhancement software couldn't produce a usable identification. The figure appeared to be male, medium build, wearing dark clothing and a hoodie that obscured any facial features. He moved with purpose, not panic, suggesting this wasn't his first crime. "It's like chasing smoke," Mitchell complained to her partner, Detective Carlos Rodriguez, as they reviewed the footage for the 100th time. "We know someone was there. We know they did this, but we can't prove who or why." The neighborhood canvassing had produced a handful of potential witnesses, but their testimonies were contradictory and unhelpful. Mrs. Peterson next door heard some kind of commotion around 2 a.m. but assumed it was the Martinez's television. The college student across the street thought he saw a car leaving the area quickly, but couldn't remember the make, model, or even the color with any certainty. The elderly gentleman 2 houses down was convinced he'd seen someone lurking in the shadows earlier that evening, but his description changed with each telling of the story. Roberto Martinez remained in a medically induced coma at St. Joseph's Hospital, his head injuries so severe that doctors weren't optimistic about his chances of full recovery. Even if he survived, there was a significant possibility of permanent brain damage that would prevent him from ever testifying about what had happened. Maria Martinez had regained consciousness after a week, but her memory of the attack was completely gone. A mercy, perhaps, but another dead end for the investigation. The doctors say it's retrograde amnesia, Detective Mitchell explained to District Attorney James Morrison during their weekly case review. The head trauma has wiped out everything from several hours before the attack. She remembers putting Emma to bed around 8 p.m., but everything after that is just gone. The pressure from the community was mounting daily. The Martinez family had been well liked in their neighborhood. Roberto worked as a high school math teacher, while Maria ran a small bakery that was beloved by locals. The randomness of the attack had shattered the suburban sense of security, and residents were demanding answers that the police simply didn't have. Local news stations ran daily updates on the investigation, each one highlighting the lack of progress and increasing public frustration. Martinez family attack. Police still have nitrogen monoxide suspects, read the headline in the Arizona Republic. The story included interviews with neighbors, expressing their fears and criticizing the police department's handling of the case. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, everything changed. The call came from the forensics lab. At 9:47 a.m., and the excitement in technician Jennifer Walsh's voice was unmistakable. "Detective Mitchell, you need to get down here immediately," Walsh said. We found something buried in the Martinez's backyard that's going to crack this case. Wide open, the breakthrough they'd been desperately waiting for had finally arrived. Detective Sarah Mitchell's heart raced as she navigated the Phoenix traffic toward the forensics lab, her mind spinning with possibilities about what breakthrough Jennifer Walsh had discovered. After 2 weeks of dead ends and frustration, the promise of real evidence felt almost too good to be true. She'd learned not to get her hopes up too quickly in this business, but the excitement in Walsh's voice suggested this was different. The forensics lab buzzed with activity when Mitchell arrived. Walsh, a meticulous technician with 15 years of experience, stood beside a metal examination table where several evidence bags were carefully laid out under bright fluorescent lights. "What do you have for me, John?" Mitchell asked, pulling on latex gloves as she approached the table. "Yesterday, we expanded our search grid to include the entire backyard," Walsh began, her voice still carrying traces of the excitement from her earlier phone call. Ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly about 3 feet down near the back fence. When we excavated, we found this. She held up a clear evidence bag containing a black ski mask, clearly recently buried. The fabric was still damp from the Phoenix soil, and traces of mud clung to its surface. "There's more," Walsh continued, lifting a second bag. "A pair of leather gloves, also buried. But here's the real gold mine. We found a cell phone wrapped in plastic. The perpetrator must have thought burying it would destroy any evidence, but the plastic kept it relatively intact." Mitchell's pulse quickened. A cell phone could contain GPS data, text messages, call logs, a treasure trove of evidence that could blow the case wide open. "Have you been able to access it?" "That's where it gets interesting. The phone is registered to a David Crenshaw, age 29. He's got a record, mostly petty theft and burglary, but this would be his first violent crime. We're still working on extracting the data, but the phone's GPS shows it was at the Martinez house that night." As Mitchell absorbed this information, her radio crackled to life. "Detective Mitchell, we need K9 assistance at your location. Officer Marcus Rodriguez is en route with Rex." Marcus Rodriguez had been with the Phoenix Police Department's K9 unit for 8 years, and his German Shepherd partner Rex was legendary. Among the force, the powerful dog had an uncanny ability to find evidence that human investigators missed. But more importantly, Rex had developed a reputation for his gentle demeanor around trauma victims, especially children. Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, Rex trotting beside him with the confident gait of a dog who knew his job and took pride in it. Rex was impressive, 85 pounds of muscle and intelligence, with alert ears and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess every situation before acting. "Let's see what you missed at the crime scene," Rodriguez said with a grin, though his tone held the professional respect he had for Mitchell's thorough work. Rex has been itching to get back to real police work after 3 weeks of training. Exercises. They returned to the Martinez house, which still bore the scars of that violent night, despite the crime scene cleanup crew's efforts. Yellow tape fluttered in the afternoon breeze, and the boarded-up windows gave the house a haunted appearance that made neighbors cross to the other side of the street. Rex immediately went to work, his nose to the ground as he began a systematic search of the property. The dog moved with purpose, following scent trails invisible to human senses. He quickly confirmed the forensics team's findings in the backyard, alerting at the burial site where they'd found the evidence. But then Rex did something unexpected. He began following a trail that led from the backyard, through the side gate, and down the street. Mitchell and Rodriguez followed at a distance, watching as Rex's behavior became increasingly focused. The trail led 3 blocks away before ending at a bus stop, where Rex sat and looked back at them expectantly. "Interesting," Rodriguez mused. Looks like our perpetrator had an escape route planned. On the way back to check on Emma's progress with Dr. Torres, Rodriguez suggested they stop by Sarah Chun's house. Rex has been trained in victim services too, he explained. Sometimes children respond to dogs when they won't respond to people. It's worth a try. Sarah Chun's modern Scottsdale home felt like a museum compared to the chaos of the crime scene. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the contemporary art on the walls to the spotless kitchen counters. But the sterile perfection was broken by children's toys scattered throughout the living room, and the high, unmistakable tension that comes from housing a traumatized child. Emma sat in her usual spot on the living room floor, her back against the wall, clutching her stained teddy bear and staring at nothing. She'd been in that exact position when they'd left that morning, and according to Sarah Chun, she barely moved in hours. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah Chun called gently. "There are some nice people here to see you." No response, as usual. Emma didn't even glance in their direction. Rodriguez knelt down beside Rex, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy. Boy, we've got a little girl here who's been hurt. I need you to be extra gentle." Rex seemed to understand immediately. The powerful dog, who could take down armed suspects without hesitation, transformed into the gentlest creature imaginable. He approached Emma with slow, deliberate movements, his body language completely non-threatening. For the first time in 2 weeks, something changed in Emma's expression. Her vacant stare focused on Rex, and her grip on the teddy bear loosened slightly. A massive German shepherd sat down about 3 feet away from her and simply waited, as if understanding that she needed to make the first move. Minutes passed in complete silence. Detective Mitchell held her breath, afraid that any sound might break whatever fragile connection was forming. Sarah Chun clasped her hands together, so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, slowly, Emma extended one small hand toward Rex. The dog remained perfectly still as her tiny fingers touched his fur, then began to stroke gently along his head and neck. For the first time since the attack, Emma's face showed something. Other than vacant terror, it showed curiosity, maybe even the faintest hint of comfort. Rex leaned slightly into her touch, his tail giving the slightest wag. Emma's other hand finally released the teddy bear, reaching out to pet Rex with both hands now. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, but these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release, as if some dam inside her had finally cracked. "Rex has a gift with trauma victims," Rodriguez whispered to Mitchell, his voice filled with pride for his partner. "He seems to understand that they need patience and gentleness." As they watched this extraordinary interaction unfold, none of them could have predicted that this moment, this connection between a traumatized child and a gentle police dog, would soon become the key to solving the case and bringing a dangerous criminal to justice. Rex had found more than evidence in that backyard. He had found a way to reach Emma's wounded soul. The partnership that would crack the Martinez case wide open had just been born. The Phoenix Police Department's main conference room buzzed with electric energy as Detective Sarah Mitchell burst through the doors at 8:30 a.m., clutching a thick manila folder and wearing the first genuine smile her colleagues had seen in weeks. The investigation that had consumed her every waking moment was finally gaining momentum, and the breakthrough they'd all been praying for was about to unfold. "We've got him," she announced to the assembled task force, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Captain Rodriguez, District Attorney James Morrison, and several other detectives looked up from their coffee and case files with expressions of cautious optimism. David Michael Crenshaw, 29 years old, unemployed, with an address listed as a rundown apartment complex on the south side of Phoenix. Mitchell spread his mugshot and criminal history across the conference table like a winning poker hand, and the room fell silent as everyone absorbed the information. His rap sheet reads, "Like a criminal's greatest hits," Mitchell continued, pointing to the extensive documentation. "Burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, drug possession with intent to distribute, theft, vandalism, and domestic violence. He's been in and out of the system since he was 18, with increasingly violent tendencies." Captain Rodriguez studied the photographs and reports with the weathered eyes of someone who'd seen too many career criminals escalate to more serious crimes. "What's the evidence connecting him to the Martinez house?" Mitchell's smile widened as she pulled out the forensics report. "His fingerprints are all over the back fence of the Martinez property. But that's not the best part. We found his cell. Phone buried in their backyard, wrapped in plastic, like he thought that would somehow make it disappear. The GPS data shows the phone was at the Martinez house from approximately 1:45 a.m. to 2:15 a.m. on the night of the attack." She spread out a detailed timeline that the forensics team had reconstructed. Cell tower pings show his movement pattern that night. He left his apartment around 1:20 a.m. His phone went dark near the Martinez house, probably when he turned it off or buried it. Then it pings back online at a gas station 6 miles away at 2:47 a.m. Day Morrison leaned forward, his prosecutorial instincts already calculating the strength of their case. "What about the physical evidence from the burial site?" "The ski mask recovered from the backyard contains traces of Crenshaw's DNA, hair follicles, and skin cells. The leather gloves found with it are a size large, consistent with Crenshaw's hand measurements from his previous arrests. Even better, there are microscopic traces of blood on the gloves that match both Roberto and Maria Martinez." Detective Carlos Rodriguez, Mitchell's longtime partner, whistled low. "Sounds pretty airtight to me. When do we bring him in?" "That's where it gets interesting," Mitchell replied, her expression growing more serious. "Crenshaw isn't at his listed address. According to his landlord, he cleared out 3 days after the attack, left behind most of his belongings and 2 months' worth of unpaid rent. Classic behavior of someone running from something." Captain Rodriguez frowned. "So where is he now?" "We're tracking down leads. His ex-girlfriend, Monica Vasquez, filed a restraining order against him 6 months ago. She's agreed to cooperate with the investigation. His mother lives in Tucson, and we've got local police monitoring her house. But here's the thing. Crenshaw's not exactly criminal mastermind material. His previous crimes have all been impulsive, sloppy. This level of planning, burying evidence, disappearing, it's not his usual pattern." Da Morrison stood up and began pacing, a habit he'd developed during 30 years of prosecuting violent criminals. Maybe he's learning, evolving. Criminals do that sometimes. They get smarter with each crime, especially when they realize the stakes are getting higher. "Or maybe something went wrong that night," suggested Detective Lisa Park, who specialized in violent crimes. "Maybe. He went in thinking it was just another burglary, but the Martinez family fought back harder than he expected. When it turned violent, he panicked and tried to cover his tracks better than usual." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "That theory fits. With the crime scene evidence, the level of violence was extreme, almost personal. But the methodical burial of evidence suggests he had time to think and plan after the fact. The investigation had revealed disturbing details about Crenshaw's recent activities. Bank records showed he'd been struggling financially, with his account overdrawn and multiple unpaid bills. His employment history was spotty at best, a series of short-term jobs in construction, landscaping, and food service, all ending abruptly due to conflicts with supervisors or suspected theft. Neighbors at his apartment complex described him as angry, unpredictable, Mitchell continued, reading from witness statements. Multiple noise complaints, fights with other residents, threats made against the building manager. One neighbor said she was afraid to walk past his door because He would sometimes stand in the hallway and stare at people. The psychological profile painted a picture of a man spiraling out of control. Dr. Sarah Williams, the department's consulting psychiatrist, had reviewed Crenshaw's history and provided her assessment. This individual shows classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with increasing violent tendencies. The progression from property crimes to violent assault follows a predictable pattern. He's becoming more dangerous with each offense. But the case took an unexpected turn when Detective Rodriguez's phone rang. The caller ID showed the Phoenix FBI field office, and his expression grew serious as he listened to the voice on the other end. "That was Agent Thompson," he announced after hanging up. "Crenshaw just used his credit card at a gas station in Flagstaff. Local police have been notified, and they're coordinating with us for the arrest." The room erupted in controlled excitement as the task force prepared for what they hoped would be the final phase of the investigation. Arrest warrants were prepared, transport was arranged, and protocol was reviewed for bringing Crenshaw back to Phoenix. However, Don Morrison's expression remained cautious. "Before we celebrate, let's remember that catching him is only the first step. We need to be prepared for his defense attorney to challenge every piece of evidence. Lisa Park is one of the best public defenders in the state, and if she's assigned to this case, she'll find every possible weakness in our evidence." His concerns proved prophetic. Within hours of Crenshaw's arrest in Flagstaff, public defender Lisa Park had already begun building his defense. Her reputation for aggressive, thorough defense work was legendary in Phoenix legal circles, and she'd successfully gotten charges reduced or dismissed in several high-profile cases. "My client maintains his complete innocence," Park announced to the media outside the courthouse. "The prosecution's case relies entirely on circumstantial evidence, and we intend to prove that David Crenshaw was nowhere near the Martinez house that night. The Phoenix Police Department is under enormous pressure to solve this case, and they're rushing to judgment against an easy target." She pointed out that Crenshaw had been at Murphy's bar until 3 a.m. that night, with multiple witnesses who could corroborate his alibi. The fingerprints on the fence could have been left days or even weeks earlier. The buried cell phone, while suspicious, didn't prove he was the one who buried it or that he committed the attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," Park continued, "this is a case of guilt by association and prosecutorial desperation. David Crenshaw is a convenient suspect with a criminal record, but that doesn't make him guilty of this terrible crime." As the legal battle lines were drawn, Detective Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that despite all their evidence, the hardest fight was still ahead of them. Crenshaw's defense was going to be formidable, and their case, while strong, wasn't the slam dunk they'd hoped for. The real test would come in the courtroom, where a jury would decide whether their evidence was enough to convict a man of attempted murder and send him away for life. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear in Phoenix, but the atmosphere surrounding Maricopa County Superior Court was anything but peaceful. By 6 a.m., news vans lined the street like a military convoy, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky as reporters prepared for what local media had dubbed the trial of the century. The Martinez family attack had gripped the community's attention for months, and now, finally, justice would have its day in court. Judge Catherine Williams, a no-nonsense jurist with 23 years on the bench, had requested additional security for the proceedings. Protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, some demanding justice for the Martinez family, others advocating for fair treatment of the accused. The crowds were orderly but passionate, their signs reading "Justice for Emma," and "Innocent until proven guilty," creating a stark visual reminder of the stakes involved. Inside courtroom 4A, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The gallery was packed to capacity with reporters, family members, concerned citizens, and legal observers. Roberto Martinez, still showing visible signs of his injuries and moving slowly with a cane, sat in the front row beside his wife, Maria. Their presence was a powerful reminder of the human cost of the crime that had brought them all here. District Attorney James Morrison stood at the prosecution table, reviewing his opening statement one final time. At 58, Morrison had prosecuted hundreds of violent crimes, but this case felt different. The evidence was strong, but he knew that defense attorney Lisa Park would exploit every possible weakness. Across the aisle, Park sat beside her client David Crenshaw, who looked remarkably different from his mugshot, clean-shaven, wearing a conservative suit, and projecting an image of respectability that she hoped would create reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Williams," announced the bailiff, and the packed courtroom rose as one. Judge Williams took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with experienced eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the trial of the state of Arizona versus David Michael Crenshaw. The defendant is charged with 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, 1 count of burglary in the first degree, and 1 count of aggravated assault. Mr. Morrison, you may proceed with your opening statement." Morrison rose slowly, his silver hair catching the courtroom lights as he approached the jury box. The 12 jurors, 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 67, watched him with rapt attention. He had spent weeks studying their backgrounds during jury selection, understanding that these 12 people held David Crenshaw's fate in their hands. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of courtroom experience. 3 months ago, Roberto and Maria Martinez went to bed in their suburban Phoenix home, believing they were safe. They had tucked their 3-year-old daughter Emma into her princess-themed bedroom, checked the locks on their doors, and settled in for what they thought would be a peaceful night's sleep. Morrison paused, letting the normalcy of that scene settle in the jurors' minds before continuing. But at approximately 1:45 a.m., their world exploded into violence and terror. David Crenshaw broke into their home, armed with a crowbar and fueled by desperation. When Roberto Martinez confronted him to protect his family, the defendant unleashed a savage attack that nearly killed both parents and traumatized their innocent child in ways that may never fully heal. The prosecutor methodically laid out the state's case, piece by piece. He described the crime scene in vivid detail, explaining how forensic evidence would prove Crenshaw's presence at the house. He showed the jury photographs of the buried evidence, the ski mask, gloves, and cell phone, and explained how GPS data would place Crenshaw at the scene during the exact time of the attack. "The evidence in this case is overwhelming," Morrison concluded, making eye contact with each juror. "David Crenshaw's fingerprints, his DNA, his cell phone data, and his panicked flight from justice all point to one inescapable conclusion. He is guilty of these heinous crimes, and it is your duty to hold him accountable." When Morrison returned to his seat, the courtroom was silent, except for the soft scratching of reporters' pens. Several jurors were taking notes, their faces serious as they absorbed the prosecution's version of events. Defense attorney Lisa Park rose with the confidence of someone who had spent 15 years defending the accused against seemingly impossible odds. At 42, she was known throughout Phoenix legal circles as a formidable advocate who never backed down from a fight. Her opening statement would be crucial in planting seeds of doubt about the prosecution's case. "Members of the jury," Park began, her voice warm but commanding, "Mr. Morrison just told you a compelling story. It's a story with a clear villain and innocent victims, a story that tugs at your heartstrings and makes you want justice. But I'm here to tell you that this story, however compelling, is built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence, rushed judgments, and prosecutorial desperation." Park moved gracefully around the courtroom as she spoke, making the case personal and immediate. David Crenshaw is not a monster. He's a flawed human being with a troubled past, yes, but that doesn't make him guilty of these terrible crimes. The prosecution wants you to believe that because my client has made mistakes in his life, he must be guilty of this attack. That's not justice, that's prejudice. She systematically began dismantling the prosecution's case. The fingerprints on the fence? They could have been left there days or weeks earlier when Crenshaw was in the neighborhood for any number of innocent reasons. The buried cell phone? No evidence that Crenshaw himself buried it, and the plastic wrapping suggested someone else was trying to frame him. The GPS data? Cell phone towers weren't precise enough to definitively place him inside the Martinez home. Most importantly, Park continued, my client has an alibi. David Crenshaw was at Murphy's Bar on the night of October 3rd, drinking with friends and watching Monday Night Football. He was there from 9 p.m. until well after 3 a.m., surrounded by witnesses who will testify to his presence. The prosecution's timeline simply doesn't work. Her voice grew more passionate as she approached her conclusion. The Phoenix Police Department was under enormous pressure to solve this case. The community was terrified, the media was demanding answers, and politicians were calling for results. In that environment, they found a convenient suspect with a criminal record and built their case around him, ignoring evidence that didn't fit their predetermined conclusion. Park paused at the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. I'm asking you to do something difficult but essential. Look past the emotion of this case and focus on the facts. When you do that, you'll find that the prosecution hasn't proven my client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. David Crenshaw is innocent of these charges, and it's your duty to find him not guilty. As Park returned to her seat, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. The battle lines had been drawn, and both sides had presented compelling but contradictory versions of the truth. Judge Williams called for a brief recess before the prosecution would begin presenting its case. During the break, Detective Sarah Mitchell watched the jurors' faces, trying to gauge their reactions to the opening statements. Some seemed convinced by Morrison's methodical presentation of evidence, while others appeared thoughtful about Park's challenges to the prosecution's timeline. The real test would come in the next phase of the trial, when witnesses would take the stand and the evidence would be subjected to rigorous cross-examination. Both sides knew that this case would ultimately be won or lost on the credibility of the evidence and the persuasiveness of their arguments. As court reconvened, everyone in the packed gallery understood that they were witnessing the beginning of a legal battle that would determine not just David Crenshaw's fate, but whether justice would truly be served for the Martinez family and their traumatized daughter Emma. By day 4 of the trial, the prosecution's carefully constructed case was beginning to resemble a house of cards in a windstorm. District Attorney James Morrison sat in his office at 11:30 p.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered legal briefs, watching his decades of courtroom experience seemingly crumble before his eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he reviewed the day's testimony transcripts, each page revealing another crack in what had once seemed like an airtight case. The day had started with such promise. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the forensics lab had taken the stand to testify about the DNA evidence found on the ski mask. Her credentials were impeccable. 15 years of experience, certified by the American Board of Criminalistics, with a track record of testimony in over 200 cases. Morrison had been confident that her scientific expertise would solidify their case against David Crenshaw. But defense attorney Lisa Park had been relentless in her cross-examination. Dr. Walsh, Park had begun with deceptive politeness. You testified that the DNA sample from the ski mask was degraded due to soil contamination. Is that correct? Yes, that's accurate, Walsh replied, maintaining her professional composure. Despite the aggressive questioning, And when DNA is degraded, it becomes more difficult to make a definitive identification, doesn't it? It can be, yes. Park had pounced on that admission like a predator sensing weakness. In fact, Dr. Walsh, your lab's own protocols state that degraded samples should be classified as inconclusive rather than matched when the quality falls below certain thresholds. Isn't that right? The forensic expert had shifted uncomfortably. In her chair, the sample quality was at the borderline of our standards, but there were enough viable markers to make a determination. Borderline, Park repeated, letting the word hang in the air for the jury to absorb. And isn't it true that borderline samples have a significantly higher rate of false positives? Morrison had objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen uncertainty creep into the prosecution's star witness, and Park had successfully planted doubt about the reliability of the DNA evidence. The afternoon had brought even worse news. Crenshaw's alibi witnesses had taken the stand, and their testimony was devastatingly effective. 3 bartenders and 5 regular customers from Murphy's Bar all swore under oath that David Crenshaw had been at the establishment from 9 p.m. until well after 3 a.m. on the night of the attack. Tommy Rodriguez, the night manager at Murphy's, had been particularly convincing. I remember Dave being there because he got into an argument with another customer about the football game, Rodriguez testified. It was loud enough that I had to threaten to throw them both out. That was around 2:30 a.m., and Dave stayed until we closed at 3:15. Morrison had tried to shake their testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that alcohol consumption might have affected their memory or that they might be lying to protect Crenshaw. But Park had prepared her witnesses well. They were consistent in their accounts, specific about timing, and credible in their demeanor. Mr. Rodriguez, Morrison had pressed, how can you be so certain about the exact time of this alleged argument? Because Monday Night Football was still on, Rodriguez replied confidently. The game went into overtime, which is unusual. I remember checking my watch because we were supposed to close at 3 o'clock, but the customers wanted to see the end of the game. The argument happened during the overtime period. Morrison's heart had sunk as he realized the devastating implications. Monday Night Football on October 3rd had indeed gone into overtime, ending at 2:47 a.m. Pacific Time. If Crenshaw was at the bar during overtime, he couldn't have been at the Martinez house at 2:15 a.m. The prosecution's timeline was falling apart, and Morrison knew it. The cell phone GPS data, which had seemed so damning, was being revealed as less precise than they'd initially believed. The forensic evidence was being challenged on technical grounds. Most damaging of all, the alibi witnesses appeared credible and consistent. During the evening recess, Morrison had met with Detective Sarah Mitchell and the rest of the prosecution team in his office. The mood was grim as they assessed the damage to their case. Where do we stand realistically? Morrison asked, his voice betraying the frustration he felt. Detective Mitchell spread out her case notes on the conference table. The DNA evidence is being questioned. The fingerprints on the fence are circumstantial at best, and the cell phone data isn't as definitive as we thought. Park is doing exactly what good defense attorneys do. She's creating reasonable doubt. What about the buried evidence? Morrison asked. The ski mask and gloves were found on the Martinez property. Park's arguing that someone else could have buried them there to frame Crenshaw, Mitchell replied. Without direct evidence that he buried them himself, it's just another piece of circumstantial evidence. The team sat in silence for several minutes, each absorbed in their own thoughts about how a case that had seemed so strong just days earlier was now teetering on the edge of collapse. We have one option left, Morrison said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. Emma Martinez. Dr. Rebecca Torres, who had been observing the trial to prepare for Emma's potential testimony, immediately shook her head. James, I've told you repeatedly that Emma isn't ready. Putting her on the stand could cause severe psychological damage. I understand your concerns, Rebecca, but we're looking at the possibility of a child's attacker walking free, Morrison replied. Emma is the only witness to what actually happened in that house. Without her testimony, Crenshaw could be acquitted. The child psychologist's expression was pained as she considered the ethical dilemma. Emma has made progress in recent weeks, especially with Officer Rodriguez's dog Rex present during our sessions. She started speaking again, though not about the attack, but forcing her to relive that trauma in a courtroom full of strangers. What if we could make accommodations? Morrison pressed. Clear the gallery. Allow Rex to be present. Have you there to support her? Torres was quiet for a long moment, weighing the potential harm to Emma against the need for justice. Even with accommodations, there's no guarantee she'll be able to testify. The trauma may be too deep, and if she breaks down on the stand, it could set back her recovery by months or even years. Detective Mitchell leaned forward. What about her visits with Rex? You said she's been more responsive with the dog present. It's true that Rex seems to provide her with a sense of security, Torres admitted. There's something about the dog's presence that calms her, makes her feel safe. But that doesn't mean she's ready to face her attacker in court. Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. As a prosecutor, his duty was to seek justice for the victims. As a human being, he felt the moral obligation to protect a traumatized child from further harm. If we don't call Emma, Crenshaw walks, he said finally. The jury is already seeing reasonable doubt in every piece of evidence we present. Park has done her job too well. And if we do call Emma and she can't testify, or if she breaks down on the stand, we lose anyway, Torres pointed out. Plus, we potentially destroy a little girl's chance at recovery. The room fell silent again as everyone grappled with the impossible choice before them. Outside, the Phoenix night was quiet, but inside that office, the weight of a decision that would affect multiple lives hung heavy in the air. Finally, Morrison turned back to face the group. Schedule Emma for tomorrow morning. We'll make every accommodation possible. Clear the courtroom, bring in Rex, have Dr. Torres present. But we have to try. That little girl is the only person who can tell us what really happened that night. As the meeting broke up, Morrison remained at the window, staring out into the darkness and wondering if he was making the right decision. In less than 12 hours, a traumatized 3-year-old would face the most difficult moment of her young life, and the entire case would rest on whether she could find the courage to speak. The morning of October 19th arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to blanket the entire Phoenix courthouse. By 8 a.m., Courtroom 4A had been transformed into something resembling a child's safe space rather than a traditional legal battlefield. Judge Catherine Williams had ordered the gallery cleared of all spectators except essential personnel. The harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed to a softer glow, and a small table with coloring books and toys had been placed near the witness stand. Dr. Rebecca Torres arrived early, carrying a bag filled with Emma's favorite comfort items from home, her beloved teddy bear, now cleaned but still showing faint stains from that terrible night, a purple blanket she'd had since birth, and a small collection of picture books that had begun to hold her attention again in recent weeks. Torres had spent the previous evening with Emma and her Aunt Sarah Chun, gently preparing the little girl for what might happen in court without explicitly discussing the traumatic events she might be asked to remember. Emma, sweetheart, Torres had explained in her child-friendly way. Tomorrow we're going to visit a big room where some grown-ups want to ask you questions. Your friend Rex will be there, and I'll be right beside you the whole time. If you don't want to answer any questions, that's perfectly okay. Emma had nodded solemnly, her dark eyes still carrying shadows of that night, but showing more awareness and engagement than Zod she'd displayed in the weeks immediately following the attack. Her speech had gradually returned over the past month, though she spoke primarily about simple, safe topics, favorite foods, cartoon characters, games she wanted to play. Never once had she mentioned that night. Never once had she spoken about the masked figure who had shattered her family's world. At 9:15 a.m., District Attorney Morrison stood before Judge Williams to make his final request. Your Honor, given the unique circumstances of this case and the age of our witness, we respectfully request that Officer Rodriguez and his K-9 partner, Rex, be allowed to remain in the courtroom during Emma Martinez's testimony. As Dr. Torres can attest, the child has shown significant positive response to the dog's presence during therapy sessions. Defense attorney Lisa Park rose to object, but Judge Williams raised her hand. Ms. Park, I understand your concerns about anything that might influence the jury's perception, but we're dealing with a 3-year-old trauma victim here. I'm going to allow the accommodation. Officer Rodriguez, please have Rex positioned where Emma can see him, but away from the jury box. Marcus Rodriguez entered quietly with Rex at his side, the German shepherd moving with his characteristic calm dignity. Rex seemed to sense the solemnity of the occasion, his usual alert playfulness replaced by an almost therapeutic stillness. The dog had been specially groomed for the occasion, his coat gleaming under the courtroom lights, his brown eyes intelligent and gentle. At 9:30 a.m., Emma Martinez entered the courtroom holding her Aunt Sarah Chun's hand. The little girl looked impossibly small in the vast space, wearing a simple blue dress that her aunt had chosen because it was Emma's favorite color. Her dark hair had been carefully braided, and she clutched her teddy bear with one arm while holding Sarah's hand with the other. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Emma was gently guided toward the witness area. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys as everyone present seemed to hold their breath. David Crenshaw, sitting at the defense table, stared straight ahead with no visible emotion, though his hands were clenched tightly in his lap. Dr. Torres approached Emma with practiced gentleness. Hi, sweetheart. Do you remember me telling you about this room? Look, there's Rex. Emma's eyes immediately found the German shepherd, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, her expression brightened slightly. Rex, as if understanding his role perfectly, remained seated, but allowed his tail to give one gentle wag of recognition. Emma, Dr. Torres continued, settling into a chair beside the modified witness stand that had been lowered to accommodate the child's height. These people would like to ask you some questions. Remember, you only have to answer if you want to. If you get scared or want to stop, just tell me, okay? Emma nodded, though she continued to stare at Rex rather than looking at any of the adults in the room. De Morrison approached very slowly, his usual commanding courtroom presence replaced by the gentlest demeanor he could manage. Hello, Emma, Morrison said softly. My name is Mr. Morrison. Can you tell me your name? Silence. Emma looked at Dr. Torres, then back at Rex, but didn't speak. That's okay, Morrison continued patiently. Can you tell me how old you are? Emma held up 3 small fingers, still not speaking, but making her first gesture of communication. For the next 20 minutes, Morrison tried every gentle approach he could think of. He asked about her favorite toys, her favorite foods, what she liked to watch on television. Occasionally, Emma would nod or shake her head. Sometimes she would hold up fingers to indicate numbers, but she remained completely silent. Dr. Torres intervened periodically to reassure Emma, offering her water or asking if she wanted to take a break. The little girl seemed comfortable enough in the modified courtroom setting, but she showed no inclination to speak about anything, let alone the traumatic events of that October night. Judge Williams watched the proceedings with growing concern. She could see the prosecution's desperation, the defense's growing confidence, and most importantly, the strain on the small child who held the key to justice in her silence. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Williams said quietly, "I think we need to consider." That's when Officer Rodriguez made a decision it would change everything. He had been watching Emma's behavior carefully, noting how her eyes kept returning to Rex despite the adult's attempts to engage her attention. During his years of working with trauma victims, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when someone was ready to trust, ready to take a step forward in their healing. "Your Honor," Rodriguez said, standing slowly, "may I approach?" With Rex, Judge Williams hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Proceed, Officer Rodriguez." Rodriguez walked toward Emma with Rex at his side, moving with deliberate slowness. "Emma," he said in the same gentle tone he used during their therapy sessions, "Rex has been wondering how you're doing. He's been thinking about you." For the first time since entering the courtroom, Emma looked directly at an adult other than Dr. Torres. She watched as Rodriguez and Rex approached, her grip on the teddy bear loosening slightly. Rex, following Rodriguez's nearly imperceptible hand signals, moved to within 3 feet of Emma and sat down, his brown eyes fixed on her face with the same patient attention he'd shown during their previous meetings. The courtroom remained absolutely silent, everyone sensing that something significant was about to happen. Emma slowly stood up from her chair, still holding her teddy bear, but no longer clutching it desperately. She took one small step toward Rex, then another. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, allowing her to approach at her own pace. When Emma reached Rex, she knelt down and placed one small hand on his head, stroking his fur with the same gentle motion she'd used during their therapy sessions. For the first time in weeks, her face showed something approaching peace. Then, as if drawing strength from Rex's calm presence, Emma stood up and turned to face the courtroom. Her dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the judge, the lawyers, the court personnel, and finally settling on the defense table where David Crenshaw sat frozen in his chair. In the absolute silence that followed, Emma Martinez raised her small right hand and pointed directly at David Crenshaw. Her voice, when it came, was clear and unmistakable despite its youth. "Bad man." The 2 words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Part 8. Justice found its voice. The words "bad man" echoed through courtroom 4 like a seismic shock, reverberating off the wood-paneled walls and settling into the stunned silence that followed. Every person in the room felt the weight of those 2 simple words spoken by a 3-year-old who had finally found her voice at the most crucial moment imaginable. Emma Martinez stood beside Rex, her small hand still pointing steadily at David Crenshaw, her dark eyes fixed on the man who had shattered her family's world. The transformation in her demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the vacant, traumatized expression that had haunted her face for months. In its place was a clarity that belied her young age, as if speaking those words had somehow freed her from the prison of silence that trauma had built around her. David Crenshaw's reaction was immediate and devastating. The careful composure he had maintained throughout the trial crumbled in an instant. His face went ashen white, his hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and he seemed to shrink into his chair as if trying to disappear. Defense attorney Lisa Park grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear, but the damage was already done. "Bad man hurt Mommy and Daddy," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. She turned to look at Dr. Torres, then back at Rex, as if drawing courage from their presence. He had a black thing on his face. He was very scary. The courtroom erupted in barely controlled chaos. Gasps echoed from the essential personnel who had been allowed to remain, and several jurors leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word from the small witness. Judge Catherine Williams maintained order with her gavel, but even she seemed visibly moved by Emma's breakthrough testimony. Morrison, seasoned prosecutor though he was, found himself fighting back tears as he approached Emma with renewed gentleness. "Emma, sweetheart, are you sure that's the man who hurt your parents?" "Yes," Emma replied with startling certainty. "He came in our house when it was dark. Daddy tried to stop him, but he hurt Daddy with the big stick." She demonstrated a swinging motion with her small arms. "Mommy was crying, and I was very scared, so I hid in my closet with Bear." She hugged her teddy bear closer. The psychological dam that had held back Emma's memories for months had finally burst, and the words came tumbling out with increasing confidence. She described hearing loud noises, seeing the masked figure through her bedroom door, and watching her father try to protect the family before being brutally attacked. Defense attorney Park attempted one last desperate objection. "Your Honor, this child has been through tremendous trauma. Her memories could be confused, influenced by bad man." Emma interrupted, pointing at Crenshaw again with unmistakable certainty. "That's the bad man." The force of her conviction silenced the courtroom once more. Even Park seemed to recognize that any further attempts to discredit Emma's testimony would appear heartless to the jury. The little girl's identification was not only clear, but emotionally compelling in a way that forensic evidence could never be. As Emma's testimony concluded, the psychological weight of the moment seemed to crush David Crenshaw completely. During the lunch recess, he huddled with his attorney in hushed, desperate conversation. Park emerged from the meeting looking defeated, and when court reconvened, she approached the bench with emotion that surprised no one who had witnessed Emma's devastating testimony. "Your Honor," Park said, her voice heavy with resignation, "my client wishes to change his plea." The formal plea hearing that followed was swift but emotionally charged. David Crenshaw, no longer able to maintain his facade of innocence, stood before Judge Williams and admitted his guilt to all charges. The words came out in broken sentences, his voice barely audible as he confessed to the home invasion that had nearly destroyed the Martinez family. I only meant to steal some things," Crenshaw stammered, his earlier defiance completely gone. "I thought the house was empty. When the man confronted me, I panicked. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not the little girl." His confession revealed the chaotic nature of the crime. What had begun as a simple burglary had escalated into violence when Roberto Martinez bravely confronted the intruder to protect his family. Crenshaw's drug addiction and mounting debts had driven him to desperation, but he claimed the savage beating he inflicted was the result of panic rather than premeditation. Judge Williams, her voice stern but measured, sentenced Crenshaw to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. "Mr. Crenshaw," she said, "your actions not only nearly killed 2 innocent people, but traumatized a child in ways that will require years of healing. While I acknowledge your guilty plea, the severity of your crimes demands the harshest sentence available under the law." As Crenshaw was led away in shackles, Emma sat in the front row with her Aunt Sarah Chun, her parents Roberto and Maria, on either side. For the first time since that terrible October night, the Martinez family was together and safe. Roberto, still bearing the physical scars of his injuries, held his daughter close, while Maria wiped away tears of relief and gratitude. The breakthrough that had occurred in the courtroom marked far more than just the resolution of a criminal case. For Emma, speaking those crucial words had been a pivotal step in her psychological healing. Dr. Torres later explained that facing her attacker and naming him had given Emma a sense of power and control that trauma victims desperately need to begin their recovery. In the weeks that followed, Emma's progress accelerated dramatically. She began speaking freely again, laughing with genuine joy, and slowly returning to the spirited child she had been before the attack. The nightmares persisted for months, but they gradually became less frequent and less intense. Officer Marcus Rodriguez and Rex received official commendations from the Phoenix Police Department for their innovative use of therapy animals in criminal investigations. Their success with Emma led to the establishment of a formal program pairing therapy dogs with child witnesses throughout Arizona. Rex became the program's first official courthouse therapy dog, helping dozens of other young victims find their voices in the pursuit of justice. The case became a landmark in legal circles, demonstrating the power of victim-centered approaches to testimony and the importance of trauma-informed practices in the courtroom. Law schools began teaching the Martinez case as an example of how the justice system could adapt to serve its most vulnerable witnesses without compromising the integrity of legal proceedings. 6 months after the trial, the Martinez family held a quiet celebration in their backyard, the same backyard where crucial evidence had been discovered, but now transformed into a place of healing and hope. Emma played with Rex under the Arizona sunshine, her laughter filling the air as she threw a tennis ball that the German Shepherd patiently retrieved over and over again. Roberto and Maria watched their daughter with profound gratitude, knowing that her courage in that courtroom had not only brought their attacker to justice, but had also been the key to her own healing. The little girl who had been silenced by trauma had found her voice again, and in doing so, had ensured that justice would be served. Sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the smallest voices, and sometimes the greatest courage is found in the simple words of a child who refuses to let evil silence her forever. Emma Martinez had faced the darkness and spoken truth to power, and in those 2 words, "bad man," she had changed everything.